Bill O'Reilly has chimed in on the Chattanooga, Tennessee shooting, and he thinks that if ISIS is involved, there will be hell to pay. Take a look.
There is one sensational report tonight that I have to mention, even though it is not exactly clear whether it's accurate. Apparently, a tweet from an ISIS-based source announced the terror action before it actually happened. Catherine Herridge is on that story. Will join us shortly. If ISIS isn't involved, even indirectly, all hell is going to break loose in this country. For months, those savages have been encouraging people on the net to attack Americans. As you know, the Obama administration's response to the growing menace of ISIS has been long-term, not an urgent campaign. Expect that to change if Muhammad Abdulazeez is linked to that terror group. On a night like this, when the nation faces the fact that 4 Marines were killed on American soil, restraint is necessary. I firmly believe President Obama is making a major mistake in the tentative nature of his response to ISIS, and I've said that many times. I hope Mr. Obama's strategy will change because ISIS is a direct threat to all Americans, even if it turns out they were not involved in the terror attack today.
So I'd like to make more fun of him for saying, I'm going to cover this even if it isn't true. But I'm in a tough spot here because yesterday I covered the same thing. Even though Irina, our executive producer, was like, don't mention the ISIS tweet. We don't know it. It's the first 24 hours. And it turns out she was right. No, they got the timing all wrong, right? So ISIS was like, yay, of course. They love that 4 Marines got killed in America. Nobody's surprised by that. But they tweeted several hours after the shooting, and they had the time zones off. And so it seemed like they had done it before the shooting, like they knew, like they had been coordinating or whatever, right? So,
we're also just taking everybody's word for it that that's an ISIS-based internet account. I mean, I don't, you know.
I'm always amazed. If they know the ISIS-based accounts, why don't they track it back, find the guy, and kill him? I never understand that. I mean, the NSA's all over our ass, but they can't track a Twitter account.
Got to get a warrant, Jack. Got to get a warrant.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can get one for that. Anyway, so.
Too hard, can't find a judge.
Yeah. Even if it's outside the country, our CIA can't figure out where a Twitter account goes. It's amazing to me. Anyways, so on the substance of it, and I love that at the end, this I can make fun of him for. He's like, even if it's not ISIS, I'm going to blame ISIS. Well, okay, then, I don't know, I guess you could have done this segment on any day.
But I mean, but in the end, his point was not an unreasonable one. His point was, if it's ISIS, going to be trouble. Well, okay, great. Well, if it is, we'll check back with you then.
Yeah. Well, yeah. First of all, didn't we have a hand in starting ISIS? Weren't there a lot of it was the military, Saddam's military.
That's right.
Once when they were disbanded, and then we didn't let them join again, so then they went off and started ISIS, right? So we created basically ISIS, and now ISIS is the biggest threat in the world, and every American's freaked out. I just did a show in Lebanon, and people were freaked out for me going to Lebanon. They were like, aren't you afraid? I'm like, of what? And they go, of ISIS. I'm like, I'm going to Lebanon to do a comedy show. I'm not going to Syria to fight with the rebels. And Americans are freaked out right now about ISIS, and we never talk about the fact that we started it, that we started them basically. And then for Mr. O'Reilly here to talk about trying to tie this guy to ISIS, it hasn't even come. We don't know what it is. So it's like, dude, get the proof. Let's figure out what it is. Number one. Number two, if it's happening, we started it. So you guys were wrong leading us into the war with Iraq. Now you're trying to blame Obama. It just disgusts me to watch these guys talk like this.
Not only did we start ISIS or have a hand in forming ISIS, but there's also the fact that if we want to talk about imminent threats, we're dealing with imminent threats in the country right now. I mean, less than a month ago, a freaking kid shot up 9 people at a church and killed them, right? That person wasn't tied to ISIS, but that person represents a growing group of people who do mass shootings in the country. How come we never hear about that real imminent threat on American soil?
And so, okay, let me add color to the two things mentioned there. One, on the issue of how ISIS got created. So, no question, every expert agrees, former members of Saddam's military is in ISIS. We drove the Baathists out and said they cannot rejoin the army. It motivated them to fight back against us. Any analysis of the Iraq war agrees with that, right? So now, we didn't say, hey, ISIS, would you like to form, and here's money to do it. But there is a secondary element to it, right? Which is that there was a lot of people, including our Sunni allies like Saudi Arabia, some allege us, some allege Israel, right? Real experts in the field, saying that they were funding a lot of the rebels in Syria, fighting against Assad's government because Assad's government is Shiite. So the Sunnis hate Assad's government, and they wanted to tear it down. And among those rebels was ISIS. Okay, so at a minimum, our allies' money went to support ISIS, whose leaders came from the Iraqi army that we drove, apart, and then that led to. So it's not like the CIA was like, okay, now we'll form a group and we'll call them Islamic State. So it's not like a conspiracy like that. But in terms of the things that led to the creation of ISIS, we had a huge role in it. And part of the reason that it happened was all of the bombings, right? And by the way, when Obama said, I'm not getting involved in the Syrian mess, John McCain's and the Bill O'Reillys of the world said, how dare you? You've got to support the rebels. Now, some of those rebels are whatever. Some of them are just Al-Qaeda, right?
Right.
Okay.
Old school.
Old school, right?
Right.
Yeah. But some of those rebels that McCain wanted to fund and O'Reilly wanted to fund turned out to be ISIS. Mm-hmm. So O'Reilly's solution was go into Iraq, create a mess from which ISIS will rise. Then fund the rebels in Syria, which turned out to be ISIS. Now his idea is more bombings, which will create the next level of ISIS.
It's in every serious look at what happened in Syria, the problem that, to me, no one could get past, even reasonable people who supported military action, and there were plenty of really good, thoughtful people who supported some more aggressive military action there, which was, how do we know what rebels we're giving these weapons to? There's so many different rebels. Yes, there are rebels there that we like, and there are rebels there, clearly, that we should be deathly afraid of. And, you mentioned the bombing, so as you've laid out the groundwork for what is an incredibly complicated situation. I just think if we just bombed a little more and a little harder, and with a little more aggression, we'd straighten this out. What do you think happens when you bomb an entire region for 35 years now, or whatever, 25 years, wherever you pick your starting date, right? Mm-hmm. But at the bare minimum, the first Iraq War. And yeah, this is what happens. This is terrible. Now we have to react to this. I'm not saying, great, thank God, if this guy turns out to be associated with some other group. Also, just on that note, very quickly, I don't know, let's just find out. If ISIS sent him, guess what? We'll react. Mm-hmm. That's what, believe me, we'll overreact. That's what we're good at.
And also, I've talked about this in my stand-up. As a Middle Eastern American, I always say it's funny because whenever a white guy does something, it's always one crazy individual. But whenever a Middle Easterner does something, they get tied to an organization, then we all start getting profiled. And so that's what's going on here. We don't know who this guy was in terms of who he was tied to. And it goes kind of to what Anna was saying about, when the guy in South Carolina did what he did, the debate became about the flag. This guy does what he does, we're talking about terrorism. Hey, how about gun control? How about doing something, and I know people go nuts whenever you mention gun control. I always talk about how Americans say that Middle Easterners and Muslims are sensitive about the Prophet Muhammad, but in America, if you talk about gun control, they're coming after you. Yep. So that's another one of the gods here. But really, it's like this is going to continue to happen for different ideologies, from white people to Middle Eastern people to black people. Maybe not black people, but there's shootings in Chicago, black people too. But I'm just saying that's the issue, and not about who just Bill O'Reilly giving the tying this guy to ISIS when the guy's not tied to ISIS.
First of all, regarding gun control, you get a couple more guys named Abdulazeez, significant automatic weaponry. Maybe America will be willing to have a gun control debate because that's
they want more guns at that point. Yeah, that's what happens.
Give enough people with that name weapons, that might scare Americans. It's about the only thing that I think could possibly do it. Yeah. I don't know. It's incredibly frustrating again and again and again because left out of this debate is who has power? Where's the power structure? And a friend of ours tweeted yesterday about how, the left will now make this guy a lone wolf the way the right does when Dylan Roof. But the fact of the matter is, there was no danger when James Holmes acts in Colorado or Dylan Roof acts in Charleston, even though the motivations for those guys were clearly very different. One was certifiably crazy, one was motivated by hate. But there is no motivation there to categorize an entire group of people who already don't have any power, who are already subject to this kind of sometimes aggressive racism, but at a bare minimum, significant inconvenience. You take a powerless group and then point the finger at them. Of course, a responsible president is going to say, hold on, I know what happened here. 4 Marines were killed, and that is horrible, and that is terrible. And if an outside organization ordered this, then guess what? We're the United States of America. I am sure we're going to go after it, but we already are going after them. I don't know how we can go after them anymore. It is the responsible thing to do to urge restraint while we don't know. And saying otherwise and comparing these situations as if white Christians were somehow put under the same kind of microscope because of Dylann Roof is absurd. It didn't happen. It never will happen.
All right, last 2 things for me. He seems to indicate as if Obama's not bombing ISIS enough. We bombed ISIS thousands upon thousands of times. So, okay, he's not happy with 2,000 or 5,000 times we bombed him. What, would 7,000 do it? Would 8,000 do it? You want ground troops? You want ground troops? Who are they going to fight against in Syria? Assad, who we hate, or ISIS, who we hate, who are on 2 different sides, or the moderates that are linked to Al-Qaeda? Which side are we going to be fighting when you put American soldiers' lives at risk in the middle of Syria? And then on the issue of the Dylann Roofs of the world, okay, well then why don't we talk about bombing them? I mean, can you imagine, okay, let's go find white racist groups in the middle of the country and bomb them. You would say that is insanity. Of course we can't do that. You don't know who else you're going to bomb there. You might kill innocent civilians. Exactly. Okay, but when it comes to Muslims, like, who cares? Just, I don't know who's there, but they're Muslims. Just bomb them. Who cares? Well, what happens is then the whole population turns against you. They would turn against you in Alabama if you started indiscriminately bombing Alabama. They turn against you in Iraq when you start bombing indiscriminately there.